Hello and welcome back to Storytime Classics Live, produced by Southwest Shakespeare Company. I am your host, Bo Heckman, and today we have our guest reader back, Ian Christensen, reading The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury. Ian, how are you on this day?
It's good to be back. I'm good, and I got some more stuff. So we have some.
It looks like it. You have more orbs of pumpkin Halloweenness
pumpkin
on either side. Yes,
right there.
And what is the tree over on your other sholdder there?
Oh, this little thing, you might ask. That's a Halloween tree. Brought to you by the fine people at Walmart. Yes,
a little plug.
I'm not plugging Walmart, but there it is. There it is at a very affordable prices. Check it out today. So this is part two of Ray Bradbury's The Halloween Tree. Do you want to do a little catch up? Do you want me to do a little?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what we last time on. Imagine
last edition of The Halloween Tree. Okay, so where we're at is the boys from the Midwestern town have traveled with Mr. Moundshroud back in time in pursuit of Pip, who keeps Pipkin, who's their best buddy, who keeps escaping to the realm beyond, to the unknown realm, to try to escape death. And we're going to find out what's going on with that. So far, they've gone to Egypt, and we've learned all about some of the Egyptian inspiration for what we know as our American Halloween. And now we have gone to Northern Europe and medieval England, and we're seeing what's going on there. Currently, the boys are in the midst of being attacked by Samhain, the god of death. And you might have seen this word before. There's a rock band named Samhain, Samhain. Mm-hmm. However, the correct pronunciation of that, I believe it's Celtic pronunciation of that, is Samhain. So Samhain, the god of death, in his giant form, has been scything down the countryside, and the boys are narrowly escaping getting chopped up. So we're learning all about those fun origins of Halloween. And Pipkin is currently a dog who's trapped in the spirit of a dog who's trying to get away. So we're in the thick of it. We've got a couple more places to go before the end of the story, and I think that catches us up. Yes, I think so. So thank you to those of you who joined in yesterday, and for those of you who are joining us again today. We're going to wrap this up today because I love Halloween. I love this time of year. And I thought this was a really good way to kind of bring us into the beginning of the spooky season.
Excellent way to usher us in. So I without further ado, I turn things over to you and take us away with the second part of The Halloween Tree.
Halloween Tree, right there. I've got one. There it is.
Thank you
very much, Bo. All right, I'll see you later. And now we shall continue with The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury, Chapter 13. Samhain, scythe uplifted, gazed all about, happy at his games. He chuckled a most delicious chuckle, spat fiery spittle on his horny hands, clenched the scythe tighter, swung it up, and froze. For somewhere, someone was singing. Somewhere near the top of a hill, in a small clump of trees, a small bonfire flickered. Men like shadows were gathered there, lifting up their arms and chanting. Samhain listened, his scythe like a great smile in his arms. "O Samhain, god of the dead, hear us. We, the holy druid priests in this grove of trees, the great oaks, plead for the souls of the dead. Plead for the souls of the dead. We pray for the souls of those who are turned into beasts. O God of the dead, we sacrifice these beasts so that you will let free the souls of our loved ones who died this year." The knives flashed. Samhain smiled an even greater smile. The animals shrieked. All around the boys on the earth, the grass, the rocks, the trapped souls, lost in spiders, lost in roaches, put away in fleas and pillbugs and centipedes, gaped and yammered silent yammers and twitched and roiled. Tom winced. He thought he heard a million small, very microscopic beats of pain and release from around him where the centipedes capered and spiders danced. "Let free, let be," prayed the druids on the hill. The fire blazed. A sea wind roared over the meadows, brushed the rocks, touched at the spiders, rolled the pill bugs, tumbled the roaches. The tiny spiders, insects, the miniature dogs, and cows fluffed away like a million snowflakes. The tiny souls trapped in insects' bodies dissolved. Released with a vast cavern whisper, they whistled up the sky. "To heaven," cried the druid priests. "Oh, go free." They flew. They vanished in the air with a great sigh of thanks and much gratitude. Samhain, god of the dead, shrugged and let them go. Then, just as suddenly, he stiffened, as did the hidden boys and Mr. Moundshroud crouched in the rocks. Through a valley and across the hill ran an army of Roman soldiers, a troop on the double. Their leader ran before them, shouting, "Soldiers of Rome, destroy the pagans, destroy the unholy religion. Suetonius so orders. For Suetonius!" Samhain in the sky raised his scythe. Too late. The soldiers slammed swords and axes into the bases of the holy druid oaks. Samhain shrieked in pain as if the axes had chopped his knees. The holy trees groaned, whistled, and with a final chop, thundered to earth. Samhain trembled in the high air. The druid priests, fleeing, stopped and shuddered. Trees fell. The priest chopped at the ankles. The knees fell. They were blown over like oaks in a hurricane. "No!" roared Samhain in the high air. "But yes," cried the Romans, "now." The soldiers gave a final mighty blow. And Samhain, god of the dead, torn at his roots, chopped at his ankles, began to fall. The boys, staring up, leaped out of the way, for it was like a giant forest falling all in one fall. They were shadowed by his midnight descent. The thunder of his death came before him. He was the greatest tree in all existence ever, the tallest oak ever to plummet down and die. Down he came through the wild air, screaming, flailing to hold himself up. Samhain hit the earth. He dropped with a roar that shook the bones of the hills and snuffed the holy fires. And with Samhain cut and down and dead, the last of the druid oaks fell with him, like wheat cut with a final scythe. His own huge scythe, a vast smile lost in the fields, dissolved into a puddle of silver and sank into the grass. Silence, a smoldering of trees, a blowing of leaves. Instantly, the sun went down. The druid priests bled in the grass as the boys watched, and the Roman captain prowled the dead fires, kicking the holy ashes. "Here we shall build our temples to our gods." The soldiers lit new fires and burned incense before golden idols, which they set in place. But no sooner lit than a star shone in the east. On far desert sands, to camel bells, 3 wise men moved. The Roman soldiers lifted their bronze shields against the glare of the star in the sky, but their shields melted. The Roman idols melted and became shapes of Mary and her son. The soldiers' armor melted, dripped, changed. They were dressed now in the garments of priests who sang Latin before yet newer altars. Even as Moundshroud crouched, squinting, weighing the scene, and whispered it to his small masked friends, "Ah, boys, see? Gods following gods. The Romans cut the druids, their oaks, their god of the dead, bang, down, and put in their own gods, huh? Now the Christians run and cut the Romans down. New altars, boys, new incense, new names." The wind blew the altar candles out. In darkness, Tom cried out. The earth shuddered and spun. Rain drenched them. "What's happening, Mr. Moundshroud? Where are we?" Moundshroud struck a flinty thumb into fire and held it up. "Why, bless me, boys, it's the Dark Ages. The longest, darkest night ever. Christ long since come and gone in the world. And where's Pipkin?" "Here," cried a voice from the black sky. "I think I'm on a broom. It's taking me away." "Hey, me too," said Ralph, and then JJ, and then Hackles Nibley, and Wally Bab, and all the rest. There was a huge whisper like a gigantic cat stroking its whiskers in the dark. "Brooms," muttered Moundshroud. "The gathering of brooms, the October Broom Festival, the annual migration. To where? Asked Tom, calling up, for everyone was making traffic on the air now in whisking shrieks. The broomworks, of course. Help! I'm flying, said Henry Hank. Whisk! A broom whistled him away. A great brambly cat flashed by Tom's cheek. He felt a wooden pole jump between his legs. Jump up. Hang on, said Moundshroud. When attacked by a broom, only one thing to do. Hold tight. I'm holding, cried Tom, and flew away. Chapter 14. The sky was swept clean with brooms. The sky was yelled clean by boys occupying at least 8 of those brooms at once. And what with changing their cries of fear to cries of delight, the boys almost forgot to look or listen for Pipkin, similarly sailed off among island clouds. This way, announced Pipkin. As quick as we can, said Tom Skelton. But Pip, it's awful hard to ride a broomstick, I find. Funny you say that, said Henry Hank. I agree. Everyone agreed, falling off, hanging on, climbing back. There was now such a hustle of brooms as left no room for clouds, and none for mists, and certainly none for fog or boys. There was an immense traffic jam of brooms, as if all the earth's forests gave up their branches in one boom and fling, and scouring autumn fields, cut clean and throttled tight such cereal grains as made good sweepers thrash, then flew up. So here came all the backyard wash line prop poles in the world, and here came with them swatches of grass, clumps of weed, brambles of bush to herd the sheep clouds and cleanse the stars and ride the boys. Said boys, each on his own skinny mount, were deluged with beatings and cuffings of flail and wood. They were punished severely for occupying heaven. They took 100 bruises each, a dozen cuts, and precisely 49 lumps on their tender skulls. Hey, I got a bloody nose, gasped Tom, happily, looking at the reds on his fingers. Shucks, cried Pipkin, going into a cloud and coming out wet. That's nothing. I got one eye shut, one ear bad, and I lost a tooth. Pipkin, called Tom. Don't keep telling us to meet you and then we don't know where. Where? In the air, said Pipkin. Cheese, said Henry Hank. There's 2,100,000,099,000,000 acres of wrapped around the world. Which half acre does Pip mean? I mean, gasped Pipkin. But a whole bundle of broomsticks banged up in an akimbo dance like a shuttle of corn stalks across his flight, or a farmland fence suddenly come antic and in frenzies. A cloud with a grand fiend face gaped its mouth. It swallowed Pipkin, broom and all, then shut its vapors tight and rumbled with Pipkin indigestion. Kick your way out, Pipkin! Stomp him in the stomach, someone suggested. But nothing kicked, and the cloud, satisfied, sailed on Forever's Bay towards eternity's dawn, ruminating over its delicious sweet boy dinner. Meet him in the air, Tom snorted. Good grief, talk about horrible directions to nowhere. See, even more horrible direction, said Moundshroud, sailing by on a broom that looked like a wet and angry cat at the end of a mop. Would you see witches, boys, hags, crones, conjure wives, magicians, black magics, demons, devils? There they be in mobs, in riots, boys, skin your eyeballs. And there below, all across Europe, through France and Germany and Spain, on the night roads were indeed clusters and mobs and parades of strange sinners running north, scrambling away from the southern sea. That's it! Jump! Run! This way to the night! This way to the dark! Moundshroud swooped low, shouting over the mobs like a general leading a fine evil troop. Quick! Hide! Lie low! Wait a few centuries. Hide out from what? Wondered Tom. Here come the Christians! Yelled voices below on the roads, and that was the answer. Tom blinked and soared and watched. And from all the roads, the mobs ran to stand alone on farms or at crossroads or in harvest fields, in towns, old men, old women, toothless and raving, yelling to the sky as the broom swept down. Why, said Henry Hank, stunned, those are witches! Dry clean my soul and hang it out to dry if you're not right, boy, agreed Moundshroud. There are witches jumping fires, said JJ, and witches stirring cauldrons, said Tom, and witches drawing symbols in farmyard dust, said Ralph. Are they real? I mean, I always thought, real? Moundshroud, insulted, almost fell from his bramble cat broom. Ye little gods and fishes, lad, every town has its resident witch. Every town hides some old Greek pagan priest, some Roman worshipper of tiny gods, who ran up the roads, hid in culverts, sank in caves to escape the Christians. In every tiny village boy, in every scrubby farm, the old religions hide out. You saw the Druids cut and chopped, eh? They hid from the Romans. And now the Romans, who fed Christians to lions, run themselves to hide. So all the little lollygagging cults, all flavors and types, scramble to survive. See how they run, boys. And it was true. Fires burned all over Europe. At every crossroad and by every haystack, dark forms jumped in cats across flames. Cauldrons bubbled. Old hags cursed. Dogs frolicked red-hot coals. Witches everywhere, said Tom, amazed. I never knew there were so many. Mobs and multitudes, Tom. Europe was flooded to the dikes. Witches underfoot, under bed, and in the cellars and high attics. Boy, oh boy, said Henry Hank, proud of his witch costume. Real witches. Could they talk to the dead? No, said Moundshroud. Jump with devils? No. Keep dogs in door hinges and squeal out at midnight? No. Ride broomsticks? Nope. Put sneezing spells on people? Sorry. Kill folks by sticking pins in dolls? No. Well, heck, what could they do? Nothing. Nothing? Cried all the boys, affronted. Oh, they thought they could, boys. Moundshroud led the team down on their brooms over the farms, where witches dropped frogs in cauldrons and stomped toads and snuffed mummy dust and cavorted in cackles. But stop and think, what does the word witch truly mean? Why, said Tom, and was stymied. Wits, said Moundshroud. Intelligence. That's all it means. Knowledge. So any man or any woman with half a brain and with inclinations toward leaning had his wits about him, eh? And so anyone too smart who didn't watch out was called a witch, said everyone. And some of the smart ones, the ones with wits, pretended at magic or dreamed themselves with ghosts and dead shufflers and ambling mummies. And if enemies dropped dead by coincidence, they took credit for it. They liked to believe they had power, but they had none, boys, none. Sad and sorry, 'tis true, but listen, there beyond the hill, that's where the brooms come from. That's where they go. The boys listened and heard. The broomworks make the broom that looms on sky in gloom and rising of the moon. That broom which groomed to witch flies high on harvestings of storm wind grass, with shriek and sigh to motion, if in ocean seas of cloud, now soft, now loud. Below, at full tilt, a witch broom factory was filled with commotions, poles being cut and bound with broom brushes, which no sooner tied, took off up chimneys in flights of spark. On rooftops, hags leaped on to ride the stars. Oh, so it seemed, as the boys watched and voices sang, did witches feel the night wind in their bed and reel and dance with devils and the dead? No! But that is what they bragged and claimed they said, until whole continents hell-bent named witches of the innocent and did conspire to burn old witches, old women, babes, and virgins in a fire. Mobs raved through villages and farms with torches, cursing. Bonfires flared from the English Channel to the Mediterranean shore. Through all of Germany and France, 10,000 so-called evil witches hung to kick their final antic dance. No village but what shared a dread uproar as each side named the other for a devil's pig, old Satan's sow, the demon's maddened boar. Wild pigs with witches glued to their backs trotted roof tiles, flinting sparks, snorting steams. All Europe was a cloud of witches' smoke. Their judges often bound and burnt them. For what? A joke. Until All men are spoiled with guilt, all sin, all lie. So what to do? Why, everyone must die. Smoke churned the sky. At every crossroads, witches hung, crows gathered in a feathered darkness. The boys hung from their brooms in the sky, eyes popped, mouths wide. Anyone want to be a witch? Asked Moundshroud at last. Said Henry Hank, shivering in his witch's rags. Not me. No fun, eh, boy? No fun. The brooms flew them off through chars and smokes. They landed on an empty street in an open place in Paris. Their brooms fell over, dead. Chapter 15. Well now, boys, what should we do to scare the scarers? Frighten the frighteners, shiver the shiverers, called Moundshroud inside a cloud. What's bigger than demons and witches? Bigger gods? Bigger witches? Bigger churches? Guessed Tom Skelton. Bless you, Tom. You're right. Any ideas get big? Yes. A religion gets big. How? With buildings large enough to cast shadows across an entire land. Build buildings you can see for 100 miles. Build one so tall and famous it has a hunchback in it ringing bells. So now, boys, help me build it brick by brick, flying buttress by flying buttress. Let's build. Notre Dame, shouted 8 boys. And all the more reason to build Notre Dame because, said Moundshroud, listen. Bong. A bell tolled in the sky. Bong. Help, whispered a voice when the sound had died. Bong. The boys looked and saw a kind of scaffolding reared up in a half of a belfry keep upon the moon. At the very top hung a huge bronze bell that was tolling now. And from inside that bell, with every crash and bang and gong, this small voice shouted, help! The boys looked at Moundshroud. Their eyes blazed a question. Pipkin? Meet me in the air, they thought Tom, and here he is. There, hung upside down over Paris, his head for a knocker, was Pipkin in a bell, or the shadow, ghost, or lost spirit of Pipkin anyway. Which is to say there was a bell, and when it sounded the hour, why that sound was made by a flesh and blood clapper which knocked the rim. Pipkin's head banged the bell, bong, and again, bong. Knock his brains out, gasped Henry Hank. Help, called Pipkin. A shadow in the bell, a ghost chained upside down to strike the quarters and the hours. Fly, said the boys to their brooms, but their brooms lay dead on the Paris stones. No life in them, mourned Moundshroud. Juice, sap, and fire all gone. Well now, he rubbed his chin to sparks. How do we get up to help Pipkin with no brooms? You fly, Mr. Moundshroud. Ah, no, that's not the ticket. You must save him always and forever, again and again, this night, until one grand salvation. Wait. Ah, inspiration. We were going to build Notre Dame, correct? Well then, let us by all means build it. There, and climb our way up to Hard Skull, knock the bell, sound the hour, Pipkin. Hop to it, lads. Climb those stairs. What stairs? These, here, and here, and here. Bricks fell in place. The boys leaped. And as they put a foot up, out, and down, a stair came under it, one stone at a time. Bong, said the bell. Help, said Pipkin. Feet galloping empty air came down to tap, rustle, clomp on a step, and yet another and another climbing empty space. Help, said Pipkin. Bong, again went the hollow bell. So they ran on emptiness, with Moundshroud prodding, shoving after. They ran on pure, windy light, only to have bricks and stones and mortar shuffle like cards, deal themselves solid, take form beneath their toes and heels. It was like racing up through a cake that built itself layer on stone layer, and the wild bell and sad Pipkin shouting and pleading them on. Our shadow, there it is, said Tom. And indeed, the shadow of the cathedral, this splendid Notre Dame, was tossed by moonlight all across France and half of Europe. Up, boys, up! No pause, no rest! Run! Bong! Help! They ran. They began to fall with each step. But again and again and again, steps came in place and saved them, and ran them taller so the shadows of the spires loomed tall across rivers and fields to snuff the last witch fires at crossroads. Crones, hags, wise men, demon lovers, 1,000 miles off, snuffed like candles, whiffed to smoke, wailed and sank to hide as the church leaned, tilted across the heavens. So, even as the Romans cut down Druid trees and chopped their god of the dead to fall, we now, with this church, boys, cast such a shadow as knocks all witches off their stilts and puts seedy sorcerers and trite magicians to heel. No more small witch fires, only this great lit candle. Notre Dame, presto! The boys laughed with delight, for the last step fell in place. They had reached the top, gasping. Notre Dame Cathedral was finished and built. Bong! The last soft hour was struck. The great bronze bell shuddered and hung empty. The boys leaned to peer into its cavernous mouth. There was no clapper inside, shaped like Pipkin. Pipkin, they whispered. Kin, echoed the bell in a small echo. He's here somewhere, up in the air. Meet him where he promised. And Pipkin falls back on no promises. Look about, boys, said Moundshroud. Fine handiwork, eh? Centuries of toil done in a fast gallop and sneeze, right? But something beside Pipkin is missing. What? Glance up, scan around, eh? The boys peered, they puzzled. Don't the place look awfully plain, boys? Awfully untouched and unornamented? Gargoyles! Everyone turned to look at Wally Bob, who was dressed as a gargoyle for Halloween. His face fairly beamed with revelation. Gargoyles! The place has got no gargoyles. Gargoyles, Moundshroud uttered and ululated and beautifully ribboned the word with his lizardly tongue. Gargoyles. Shall we put them on, boys? How? Why, I should think we could whistle them into place. Whistles for demons, boys, whistles for fiends. Give a high, great tooting blow for beasties and ferocious fanged loomers of the dark. Wally Bob sucked in a great breath. Here's mine. And he whistled. All whistled. And the gargoyles, they came running. Chapter 16. The unemployed of all midnight Europe shivered in their stone sleep and came awake, which is to say that all the old beasts, all the old tales, all the old nightmares, all the old unused demons put by and witches left in the lurch, quaked at the call, reared at the whistle, trembled at the summons, and in dust devils of propulsion skimmed down the roads, flitted skies, buckshot through shaken trees, forded streams, swam rivers, pierced clouds, and arrived. Which is to still say that all the dead statues and idols and semigods and demigods of Europe, lying like a dreadful snow all about, abandoned in ruins, gave a blink and start and came as salamanders on the road, or bats in the skies, or dingoes in the brush. They flew, they galloped, they skittered. To the general excitement and amazement and much babbling shout from the fringe of boys leaning out, Moundshroud leaning with them as the mobs of strange beasts came from north, south, east, west to panic at the gates and wait for whistles. Shall we drop white-hot boiling lead down on them? The boys saw Moundshroud smile. Heck no, said Tom. Hunchback already did that years ago. Well then, no burning lava. Shall we whistle them up? They all whistled. And obedient to summons, the mobs, the flocks, the prides, the crush, the collection, the raving flux of monsters, beasts, vices rampant, virtues gone sour, discarded saints, misguided prides, hollow pomps oozed, slid, suckered, pelted, ran bold and right up the sides of Notre Dame. In a flood tide of nightmare, in a tidal wave of outcry and shambled, they inundated the cathedral to crust themselves on every pinion and upthrust stone. So here ran pigs, and there climbed Satan's goats, and yet another wall new devils which recarved themselves along the way, dropped horns and grew new ones, shaved beards to spout tendril earthworm mustaches. Sometimes a swarm of only masks and faces scuttled up the walls and took the buttresses' heights, carried by an army of crayfish and wobbly, crotchy lobsters. Here came the heads of gorillas, full of sin and teeth. There came men's heads with sausages in their mouths. Beyond danced the mask of a fool, upheld by a spider that knew ballet. So much was going on that Tom said, "My gosh, so much is going on." "And more to come. There," said Moundshroud. For now that Notre Dame was infested with various beasts and spidering leers and gloms and masks, why, here came dragons chasing children, and whales swallowing Jonahs, and chariots chock full of skulls and bones, acrobats and tumblers, yanked out of shape by demideums, limped and fell in strange posture to freeze on the roof. All accompanied by pigs with harps and sows with piccolos and dogs playing bagpipes. So the music itself helped charm and pull new mobs of grotesques up the walls to be trapped and caught forever in sockets of stone. Here an ape plucked a lyre. There floundered a woman with a fish's tail. Now a sphinx flew out of the night, shed its wings and became woman and lion, half and half, settled to snooze away the centuries in the shadow and sounds of high bells. "Why, what are those?" cried Tom. Moundshroud, leaning over, gave a snort. "Why, those are sins, boys, and nondescripts. There crawls the worm and conscience." They looked to see it crawl. It crawled very fine. "Now," whispered Moundshroud softly, "settle, slumber, sleep." And the flocks of strange creatures turned about 3 times like evil dogs and lay down. All beasts took root. All grimaces froze to stone. All cries faded. The moon shadowed and lit the gargoyles of Notre Dame. "Does it make sense, Tom?" "Sure. All the old gods, all the old dreams, all the old nightmares, and all the old ideas with nothing to do, out of work. We gave them work. We called them here. And here they will remain for centuries, right?" "Right." They looked down over the rim. There was a mob of beasts on the east battlement, a crowd of sins on the west, a surge of nightmares on the south, and a fine scuttle of unnamed vices and ill-kept virtues up to the north. "I," said Tom, proud of his night's work, "wouldn't mind living here." The wind crooned in the mouths of the beasts. Their fangs hissed and whistled. "Much thanks." Chapter 17. "Jehoshaphat," said Tom Skelton on the parapet. "We whistled all those stone griffins and demons here. Now old Pipkin's lost again. I was thinking, why can't we whistle him?" Moundshroud laughed so his cape boomed on the night wind and his dry bones jangled inside his skin. "Boys, look around. He's still here." "Where?" "Here," mourned a small, faraway voice. The boys crickled their spines, looking over the parapet, cracked their necks, staring up. "Look and find, lads, hide and seek." And even in seeking, they could not help but enjoy once more the turbulent slates of the cathedral, all fringed with horrors and deliciously ugly with trapped beasts. Where was Pipkin among all those dark creatures with gills gaped open like mouths for an eternal gasp and sigh? Where, among all those lovely chiseled nightmares cut from the gallstones of night lurks and monsters cracked out of old earthquakes, vomited up from mad volcanoes which cooled themselves to fright and deliriums? Where? "Here," wailed a far, small, familiar voice again. And way down on a ledge, halfway to the earth, the boys, squinting, thought they saw one small, round, beautiful angel devil face with a familiar eye, a familiar nose, and friendly and familiar mouth. "Pipkin!" Shouting, they ran down stairways along dark corridors until they reached a ledge. Far out there on the windy air, above a very narrow walkway indeed, was that small face, lovely among so much ugliness. Tom went first, not looking down, spread-eagling himself. Ralph followed. The rest inched along in a line. Watch out, Tom, don't fall. I'm not falling. Here's Pip. And there he was, standing in a line directly under the outthrust stone mask, the bust, the head of a gargoyle. They looked up at that mighty fine profile, that great nub nose, that unbearded cheek, that fuzzy cap of marbled hair. Pipkin. Pip, for Christ, what are you doing here? Crawled Tom. Pip said nothing. His mouth was cut stone. Oh, it's just rock, said Ralph. Just a gargoyle carved here a long time ago. It looks like Pipkin. No, I heard him call. But how? And the wind gave them the answer. It blew around the high corners of Notre Dame. It fluted in ears and piped out the gaping mouths of the gargoyles. Ah, whispered Pipkin's voice. The hair stood up on the backs of their necks. Ooh, murmured the stone mouth. Listen, there it is, said Ralph excitedly. Shut up, cried Tom. Pip, next time the wind blows, tell us, how do we help? What got you here, and how do we get you down? Silence. The boys clung to the rock-clipped face of the great cathedral. Then another swoop of wind sucked by, drew their breaths, and whistled in the carved stone boy's teeth. One, said Pip's voice. Question, whispered Pip's voice again after a pause. Silence. More wind. The boys waited. Time. One question at a time, translated Tom. The boys hooted with laughter. That was Pip, all right. Okay, Tom gathered his spit. What are you doing up here? The wind blew sadly, and the voice spoke as from deep in an old well. Been so many places in just a few hours. The boys waited, grinding their teeth. Speak up, Pipkin. The wind came back to mourn in the open stone mouth, but the wind had died. It began to rain. And this was the best of all, for the raindrops ran cold in Pipkin's stone ears and out along his nose and fountained from his marble mouth, so that he began to utter syllables in liquid tongues with clear, cold, rainwater words. Hey, this is better. He spouted mist. He sprayed quick rain. You should have been where I've been. Gosh, I was buried for a mummy. I was trapped in a dog. We guessed that was you, Pipkin. And now here, said the rain in his ear, the rain in his nose, the rain in the clear dripping marble mouth. Gosh, golly, funny, strange, inside this rock with all these devils and demons for buddies. And then 10 minutes from now, who knows where I'll be, higher up or buried deep? Where, Pipkin? The boys jostled. The rain squalled and beat them so they almost tilted and fell off the ledge. Are you dead, Pipkin? No, not yet, said the cold rain in his mouth. Part of me in a hospital a long way off home, part of me in that old Egyptian tomb, part of me in the grass in England, part of me here, and part of me in a worse place. Where? I don't know. Oh gosh, 1 minute I'm yelling laughs, the next I'm scared. Just now, this very minute, I guess I know I'm scared. Help me, guys. Help. Oh, please. Rain poured out his eyes like tears. The boys reached up to touch Pipkin's chin as best they could, but before they could touch, a lightning bolt struck out of the sky. It flashed blue and white. The entire cathedral shook. The boys had to grab demon's horns and angel's wings on either side so as not to be knocked off. Thunder and smoke, a great scattering of rock and stone. Pipkin's face was gone, knocked off by the lightning bolt. It fell down through space to shatter the ground below. Pipkin! But there below on the cathedral porch stones were only flinty fire sparks blowing away, with a fine gargoyle dust, nose, chin, stone lip, hard cheek, bright eye, carved fine ear, all whipped away on the wind in chaff and shrapnel dust. They saw something like a spirit smoke, a bloom of gunpowder blow drifting south and west. Mexico, Mound Shroud, one of the few men in all the world who knew how to utter the word. Mexico, asked Tom, the last grand travel night of the last grand travel of this night, said Moundshroud, still uttering, savoring the syllables. Whistle, boys, scream like tigers, cry like panthers, shriek like carnivore. Scream, cry, shriek? Reassemble the kite, lads, the kite of autumn. Paste back the fangs and fiery eyes and bloody talons. Yell all the wind to sew it all together and ride us high and long and last. Bray, boys, whimper, trumpet, shout. The boys hesitated. Moundshroud ran along the edge like someone racketing a picket fence. He knocked each boy with his knee and elbow. The boys fell, and falling gave each his particular whimper, shriek, or scream. Plummeting down through cold space, they felt the tail of a murderous peacock flourish beneath all blood-filled eye. 10,000 burning eyes came up. Hovered suddenly round a windy corner of gargoyles, the autumn kite, freshly assembled, broke their fall. They held to the rim, to the edge, to cross struts, to trap drum rattling papers, to bits and tatters and shreds of old meat breath lion mouth and stale blood tiger's maw. Moundshroud leaped up to grab. This time he was the tail. The autumn kite hovered, waited, 8 boys upon it, billowing surf of eyes and teeth. Moundshroud turned his ear. Hundreds of miles away, beggars ran down Irish roads, starving, asking for food from door to door. Their cries rose in the night. Fred Fryer, in his beggar's costume, heard. That way, let's fly there. No time. Listen. Thousands of miles away, there was a faint tap hammering of death watch beetles ticking the night. The coffin makers of Mexico, Moundshroud smiled, in the streets with their long boxes and nails and little hammers, tapping, tapping. Pipkin, whispered the boys. We hear, said Moundshroud, and to Mexico we go. The autumn kite boomed them away on 1,000-foot tidal wave of wind. The gargoyles, fluting in their stone nostrils, gaping their marble lips, used the same wind to wail them farewell. Chapter 18. They hung above Mexico. They hung above an island in that lake of Mexico. They heard dogs barking in the night far below. They saw a few boats on the moonlit lake moving like water insects. They heard a guitar playing and a man singing in a high, sad voice. A long way across the dark borders of land in the United States, packs of children, mobs of dogs ran laughing and barking and knocking from door to door, their hands full of sweet bags of treasure, with wild joy on Halloween night. But here, whispered Tom. Here what? Asked Moundshroud, hovering at his elbow. Oh, here we... And down through all of South America. Yes, south, here and south, all the cemeteries, all the graveyards are full of candlelight, Tom thought. 1,000 candles in this cemetery, 100 candles in that cemetery, 10,000 small flickering lights farther up, 100 miles, 5,000 miles to the very tip of Argentina. Is that the way they celebrate El Dia de los Muertos? How's your grade school Spanish, Tom? The Day of the Dead Ones? Caramba, sí. Kite, disassemble. Swooping down, the kite flew apart for a final take. The boys tumbled on the stony shore of the quiet lake. Mists hung over the waters. Far across the lake, they could see an unlit tomb yard. There were, as yet, no candles burning in it. Out of the mists, a dugout canoe moved silently without oars, as if the tide touched it across the waters. A tall figure in a gray winding sheet stood motionless in one end of the boat. The boat nudged the grassy shores softly. The boys gasped, for as far as they could tell, only darkness was cupped inside the hood of the shrouded figure. Mr. Moundshroud? They knew it had to be him, but he said nothing. Only the faintest firefly of a grin flickered under the cowl. A bony hand gestured. The boys tumbled into the boat. Shh, whispered a voice from the empty hood. The figure gestured again, and Touched by wind, they blew across the dark waters under a night-filled sky filled with the billion never-before-seen fires of the stars. Far off on that dark island, there was a prickle of guitar sound. A single candle was lit in the graveyard. Somewhere, someone blew a musical sound on a flute. Another candle was lit on the tombstones. Someone sang a simple word in a song. A third candle was touched to life by a flaming match. And the faster the boat moved, the more guitar notes sounded and the more candles were lit high among the mounds on the stony hills. 12, 100, 1,000 candles flared until it looked as if the great Andromeda star cluster had fallen out of the sky and tilted itself to rest here in the middle of almost midnight Mexico. The boat struck the shore. The boys, surprised, fell out. They spun about, but Moundshroud was gone. Only his winding sheet lay empty in the boat. A guitar called to them. A voice sang to them. A road like a river of white stones and white rocks led up through the town that was like a graveyard to the graveyard that was like a town, for there were no people in the town. The boys reached the low wall of the graveyard and then the huge lacework iron gates. They took hold of the iron gates and stared in. Why, Tom gasped, I never ever seen the like. For now they knew why the town was empty, because the graveyard was full. By every grave was a woman kneeling to place gardenias or azaleas or marigolds in a frame upon the stone. By every grave knelt a daughter who was lighting a new candle or lighting a candle that had just blown out. By every grave was a quiet boy with bright brown eyes, and in one hand a small papier-mâché funeral parade glued to a shingle. In the other hand, a papier-mâché skeleton head, which rattled with rice or nuts inside. Look, whispered Tom. There were hundreds of graves. There were hundreds of women. There were hundreds of daughters. There were hundreds of sons, and hundreds upon hundreds and thousands of candles. The whole graveyard was one swarm of candleshine, as if a population of fireflies had heard of a grand conglomeration and had flown here to settle in and flame upon the stones and light the brown faces and the dark eyes and the black hair. Boy, said Tom half to himself, at home we never go to the graveyard, except maybe Memorial Day, once a year, and then at high noon, full sun, no fun. This is fun. Sure, whisper yelled everyone. Mexican Halloweens are better than ours. For on every grave were plates of cookies shaped like funeral priests or skeletons or ghosts, waiting to be nibbled by living people or by ghosts that might come along toward dawn, hungry and forlorn. No one knew. No one said. And each boy inside the graveyard next to his sister and mother put down the miniature funeral on the grave. And they could see the tiny candy person inside the tiny candy wooden coffin placed before a tiny altar with tiny candles. And around the tiny coffin stood tiny altar boys with peanuts for heads and eyes painted on the peanut shells. And before the altar boy stood a priest with a corn nut for a head, and a walnut for a stomach. And on the altar was a photograph of the person in the coffin, a real person, once remembered now. Better and still better, whispered Ralph. Cuevos, sang a far hill up the voice. Inside the graveyard, voices echoed the song. Leaning against the graveyard walls, some with guitars in their hands or bottles, were the men of the village. Cuevos de los muertos, sang the faraway voice. Cuevos de los muertos, sang the man in the shadows inside the gate. Skulls, translated Tom, the skulls of the dead. Skulls, sugar-sweet skulls, sweet candy skulls, the skulls of the dead ones, sang the voice, coming close now. And down the hill, treading softly in a shadow, came a hunchbacked vendor of skulls. No, not hunch, said Tom, half aloud. A whole load of skulls on his back, cried Ralph. Sweet skulls, sweet white crystal sugar candy skulls, sang the vendor, his face hidden under a vast sombrero. But it was Moundshroud's voice that sweetly piped. And carried from a long bamboo over his shoulder, hung on black threads, were dozens and scores of sugar skulls as big as their own heads. And each skull was inscribed, Names, names, sang the old vendor. Tell me your names, I give you your skull. Tom, said Tom. The old man plucked forth a skull. On it, in huge letters, was written, Tom. Tom took and held his own name, his own sweet edible skull in his fingers. Ralph! And a skull with the name Ralph written on it was tossed forth. Ralph caught it, laughing. And in swift gain, the bony hand plucked, tossed white skull after skull sweetly in the cool air. Henry, Hank, Fred, George, Hackles, JJ, Wally. The boys, bombarded, squealed and danced about, pelted with their own skulls and their own proud names, sugar encrusted upon each white brow of those skulls. They caught and almost dropped this splendid bombardment. They stood, mouths wide open, staring at the sugary death sweets in their gummy hands. And from within the graveyard, way high male soprano voices sang, Roberto, Maria, Conchita, Tomas, Calavera, Calavera, sweet candy bones to eat. Your name on the snow-white sweet skull, you hurry down the street. You buy from the piled high white hills in the square. Buy and eat. Chew your name. What a treat. The boys lifted their sweet skulls in their fingers. Bite the T and the O and the M. Tom. Chew the H. Swallow A. Digest N. Choke on K. Hank. Their mouths watered. But was it poison they held? Would you guess? Such happiness, such joy, as each boy dines in on darkness, makes a meal of the night. What delight! Snap a bite. Go ahead. Munch that fine candy head. The boys tapped the sweet candy names to their lips and were about to bite when, ole! A mob of Mexican boys ran up yelling their names, seizing at skulls. Tomas! And Tom saw Tomas run off with his named skull. Hey, said Tom, he sort of looked like me. Did he? Said the vendor of the skulls. Enrique! Shouted a small Indian boy, seizing Hank's skull. Enrique pelted down the hill. He looked like me, said Henry Hank. He did, said Moundshroud. Quick, boys, see what they're up to. Hold on to your sweet craniums and get. The boys jumped. For at that very moment, an explosion hit the streets below in the town, then another explosion and another. It was fireworks. The boys took a last look at the flowers, the graves, cookies, foods, skulls upon graves, miniature funerals with miniature bodies and coffins, at candles, crouched women, lonely boys, girls, men, then whirled and exploded down the hill toward the firecrackers. Into the plaza, Tom and Ralph and all the other costume boys raced, panting. They jolted to a halt and danced about as 1,000 miniature firecrackers banged around their shoes. The lights were on. Suddenly the shops were open. And Tomas and Jose Juan and Enrique were lighting and tossing the firecrackers with yells. Hey, Tom, from me, Tomas. Tom saw his own eyes glinting from the wild boy's face. Hey, Henry, this from Enrique, bang! JJ, this bang from Jose Juan. Oh, this is the best Halloween of them all, said Tom, and it was. For never in all their wild travels has so much happened to be seen, smelled, and touched. In every alley and door and windows were mounds of sugar skulls with beautiful names. From every alley came the tap-tap of Death Watch beetle coffin makers nailing, hammering, tapping coffin lids like wooden drums in the night. On every corner were stacks of newspapers with pictures of the mayor and his body painted in like a skeleton, or the president and his body all bones, or the loveliest maiden dressed like a xylophone and death playing a tune on her musical ribs. Calavera, Calavera, Calavera! The song drifted down the hill. See the politicians buried in the news, rest in peace beneath their names. Such is fame. See the skeletons juggling, standing high on each other's shoulders, preaching sermons, wrestling, playing soccer, little runners, little jumpers, little skeletons that leap about and fall. Did you ever dream that death could be whittled down so very small? And the song was true. Wherever the boys looked were the miniature acrobats, trapeze performers, basketball players, priests, jugglers, tumblers, but all were skeletons, hand to hand, bony shoulder to shoulder, and all small enough for you to carry in your fingers. And over there in a window was a whole microscopic jazz band with a skeleton trumpeter and a skeleton drummer and a skeleton playing a tuba no bigger than a soup spoon, and a skeleton conductor with a bright cap on his head and a baton in his hand, and a tiny music pouring out of their tiny horns. Never before had the boys seen so many bones. Bones, laughed everyone. Oh, lovely bones. The song began to fade. Hold the dark holiday in your palms, bite it, swallow it, and survive. Come out of the far black tunnel of El Dia de Muerte. Come out of the far black tunnel of El Dia de Muerte and be glad. Ah, so glad you are alive. Calavera, calavera. The newspapers bordered in black blew away in white funerals on the wind. The Mexican boys ran away up the hill to their families. Oh, strange, funny, strange, whispered Tom. What? said Ralph at his elbow. Up in Illinois, we've forgotten what it's all about. I mean, the dead up in our town tonight. Heck, they're forgotten. Nobody remembers. Nobody cares. Nobody goes to sit and talk to them. Boy, that's lonely. That's really sad. But here, why, it's both happy and sad. It's all firecrackers and skeleton toys down here in the plaza. And up in the graveyard now are all the Mexican dead folks with their families visiting, and flowers and candles and singing and candy. I mean, it's almost like Thanksgiving, huh? And everyone's set down to dinner, but only half the people are able to eat. But that's no mind. They're there. It's like holding hands at a seance with your friends, but some of the friends are gone. Oh, heck, Ralph. Yeah, said Ralph, nodding behind his mask. Heck. Look, oh, look there, said JJ. The boys looked. On top of a mound of white sugar skulls was one with the name Pipkin on it. Pipkin's sweet skull. But nowhere in all the explosions and dancing bones and flying skulls was there so much as one dust speck or whimper or shadow of Pip. They had grown so accustomed to Pip's leaping up in fantastic surprises on the sides of Notre Dame or weighted down in gold sarcophagi that they had expected him like a jack-in-the-box to pop from a mound of sugar skulls, flap sheets into their faces and dry surges. But no, suddenly no Pip at all. And maybe no Pip ever again. The boys shivered. A cold wind blew fog up from the lake. Chapter 19. Along the dark night, around a corner, came a woman bearing over her shoulders twin scoops of mounded charcoals burning. From these heaps of pink burning coals, firefly sparks scattered and blew in the wind. Where she passed on bare feet, she left a trail of little sparks which died. Without a word, shuffling, she went around another corner into an alley, gone. After her came a man carrying on his head, lightly, a small coffin. It was a box made of plain white wood, nailed shut. On the sides of the box were pinned cheap silver rosettes, handmade silk and paper flowers. Inside the box was... The boys stared at the funeral parade of two went by. Two, thought Tom. The man in the box, yes, and the thing inside the box. The man, his face solemn, balancing the coffin on top of his head, walked tall into the nearby church. Was that Pip again inside that box? Asked Tom. What do you think, lad? Asked Moundshroud. I don't know, cried Tom. I only know I had enough. The night's been too long, and I've seen too much. I know everything. Gosh, everything. Yeah, said everyone, clustering close, shivering. And we've got to get home, don't we? What about Pipkin? Where is he? Is he alive or dead? Can we save him? Is he lost? Are we too late? What do we do? What? Cried everyone. And the same questions flew and burst from the mouths and welled in their eyes. They all took hold of Moundshroud as if to press the answer from him, yank it from his elbows. What do we do? To save Pipkin, one last thing. Look up in this tree. Dangling from the tree were a dozen Halloween piñatas, devils, ghosts, skulls, witches that swayed in the wind. Break your piñatas, boys. Sticks were thrust in their hands. Strike! Yelling, they struck. The piñatas exploded, and from the skeleton piñata, 1,000 small skeleton leaves fell in the shower. They swarmed on Tom. The wind blew skeleton leaves and Tom away. And from the mummy piñata fell hundreds of frail Egyptian mummies, which raised away into the sky, and Ralph with them. And so each boy struck and cracked and let down small vinegar gnat dancing images of himself, so that devils, witches, ghosts shrieked and seized, and all the boys and leaves went tumbling through the sky, with Moundshroud laughing after. They ricocheted in the final alleys of the town. They banged and skipped like stones across the lake waters, to land rolling in the jumble of knees and elbows on a yet farther hill, and they sat up. They found themselves in the middle of an abandoned graveyard with no people, no lights, only stones like immense wedding cakes frosted with old moonlight. And as they watched, Moundshroud, landing light on his feet in a swift, quiet motion, bent. He reached for an iron rung in the earth. He pulled. With a shriek of hinges, a trapdoor in the earth gaped wide. The boys came to stand at the edge of the big hole. Cat, stuttered Tom. Catacombs? Catacombs, Moundshroud pointed. Stairs led down into dry dust earth. The boys swallowed hard. Is Pip down there? Go bring him up, boys. Is he alone down there? No, things are with him. Things. Well, who goes first? Not me. Silence. Me, said Tom at last. He put his foot on the step down. He sank into the earth. He took another step. Then suddenly he was gone. The others followed. They went down the steps, single file, and with each step down the dark got darker, and with each step down the silence grew more silent, and with each step down the night became deep as a well, and very black indeed, and with each step down the shadows waited, and seemed to lean from walls, and with each step down strange things seemed to smile at them from the cave which waited below. Bats seemed to be hanging clustered just over their heads, squeaking so high you could not hear them. Only dogs might hear, have hysterics, jump out of their skins and run off. With each step down, the town got farther away, and the earth and all the nice people of the earth. Even the graveyard above seemed far away. They felt lonely. They felt so alone they wanted to cry. For each step down was 1 billion miles lost from life and warm beds and good candlelight and mothers' voices and father's pipe smoke and clearing his voice in the night, which made you feel good knowing he was there somewhere in the dark, alive and turning in his sleep and able to hit anything with his fist if it had to be hit. Each step down, and at last, at the bottom of the stairs, they peered into a long cave, the long hall. And all the people were there, and very quiet. They had been quiet for a long time. Some of them had been quiet for 30 years. Some of them had been silent for 40. Some had been completely mum for 70 years. There they are, said Tom. The mummies, someone whispered. The mummies. A long line of them standing against the walls. 50 mummies standing against the right wall. 50 mummies standing against the left wall. And 4 mummies waiting at the far end in the dark. 104 dry as dust mummies, more alone than they, more lonely than they might ever feel in life, abandoned there, left below, far from dog barks and fireflies and the sweet singing of men and guitars in the night. Oh boy, said Tom, all those poor people. I heard of them. What? Their folks couldn't pay the rent on their graves, so the gravedigger dug up these people and put them down here. The earth is so dry it makes mummies out of them. And look, see how they're dressed? The boys looked and saw that some of the ancient people were dressed like farmers, and some like peasant maids, and some like businessmen in old dark suits, and one even like a bullfighter in his dusty suit of lights. But inside their suits, they were all bones and skin and spiderweb and dust that shook down through their ribs as if you sneezed and trembled them out. What's that? What? Everyone listened. All the mummies looked back with empty eyes. All the mummies waited with empty hands. Someone was weeping at the far end with a long dark hall. Oh, came the sound. Oh, came the crying. He, and the small voice wept. That's Pip. I only heard him cry once, but that's him. Pipkin, and he's trapped here in the catacomb. The boys stared, and they saw 100 feet away, crouched down in a corner, trapped at the most distant part of the catacomb, a small figure that moved. The shoulders twitched. The head was bent and covered with trembling hands, and behind the hands, the mouth wailed and was afraid. Pipkin? The crying stopped. Is that you? Whispered Tom. A long pause, a trembled insuck of breath, and then, yes. Pip, for Christ, what are you doing there? I don't know. Come out. I can't. I'm afraid. But Pip, if you stay here... Tom paused. Pip, he thought, if you stay here, you stay forever. You stay with all the silence and the lonely bones. You stand in the long line and tourists come and look at you and buy tickets to look at you some more. Pip, said Ralph behind his mask, you've got to come out. I can't, Pip sobbed. They won't let me. They? But they knew he meant the long line of mummies. In order to get out, he would have to run the gauntlet between the nightmares, the mysteries, the dreadful ones, the dyers, and the haunts. They can't stop you, Pip. Pip said, oh, yes, they can. Can, said echoes deep in the catacomb. I'm afraid to come out. And we're, said Ralph, afraid to go in, thought everyone. Maybe if we choose one brave one, said Tom, and stopped. For Pipkin was crying again, and the mummies waiting, and the night so dark, and the long tomb hall that you would sink right through the floor if you stepped on it, and never move again. The floor would seize your ankles and bony marble and hold you until freezing cold froze you into a dry dust statue forever. Maybe if we went in a mob, all of us, said Ralph, and they tried to move. Like a big spider with many legs, the boys tried to cram through the door. 2 steps forward, 1 back, 1 step forward, 1 back. Ah, wept Pipkin, at which sound they all fell upon themselves, gibbering and scrambled, yelling their dyers and frights back to the door. They heard an avalanche of heartbeats bang pains in their chests. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? He's afraid to come, us afraid to go. What do we do? Wailed Tom. Behind them, leaning against the wall, was Mound Shroud. Forgotten. A little candle flame of smile flickered and went out among his teeth. Here, boys, save him with this. Mound Shroud reached into his dark cloak and brought forth a familiar white sugar candy skull, across the brow of which was written, Pipkin. Save Pipkin, lads, strike a bargain. With who? With me and others unnamed. Here, break this skull in 8 delicious bits, boys. Hand them round. P is for you, Tom. I for you, Ralph. And half of the other P for you, Hank. And the other half for you, JJ. And some of the K for you, boy. And some for you. And here the I and the final N. Touch the sweet bits, lads. Listen. Here's the dark deal. Do you truly want Pipkin to live? Such a fury of protest burst forth at this. Mound Shroud was fair driven back by it. The boys barked like dogs against his so much as questioning their need for Pip's survival. There, he curried them. I see you mean it. Well then, boys, will you each give 1 year from the end of your lives, boys? What? Said Tom. I mean it, boys. 1 year, 1 precious year from the far-burned candle end of your life. With 1 year apiece, you can ransom dead Pipkin. A year, the whisper, the murmur, the appalling sum of it ran among them. It was hard to grasp. A year so far away was no year at all. Boys of 11 or 12 cannot guess at men of 70. A year? A year? Why, sure, why not? Yes. Think, boys, think. This is no idle bargain struck with nothing. I mean it. It is true and it is fact. It is a grave condition you make and a grave bargain you strike. 1 year, each of you must promise to give. You won't miss this year now, of course, for you are very young. I see by touching your minds you cannot even guess the final situation. Only later, 50 years from this night, or 60 years from this dawn, when you are running low on time and dearly wish for an extra or so of fine weather and much joy, then's when Mr. D for Doom or Mr. B for Bones will show up with his bill to be paid. Or perhaps I will come, old Mound Shroud himself, a friend to lads, and say, deliver. So a year promised must be a year given over. I'll say give, and you must give. What will that mean to each of you? It will mean that those of you who might have lived to be 71 must die at 70. Some of you who might have lived to be 86 must cough up your ghost at 85. That's a great age. A year more or less doesn't sound like much, but when the time comes, boys, you may regret. But you will be able to say, this year I spent well. I gave for Pip. I made a loan of life for sweet Pipkin, the fairest apple that ever almost fell too early off the harvest tree. Some of you at 49 must cross life off at 48. Some at 55 must lay down to forever sleep at 54. Do you catch the whole thing intact now, boys? Do you add the figures? Is it the arithmetic plain? A year. Who will bid 365 entire days from out of his soul to get old Pipkin back? Think, boys, think. Silence, then speak. There was a long, brooding silence of arithmetic students doing inward sums. And the sums were very fast indeed. There was no question. Though they knew the years from now they might doubt this dreadful haste, yet what else could they do? Only swim out from shore and save the drowning boy before he sank a last time into a frightening dust. Me, said Tom. I'll give a year. And me, said Ralph. I'm in, said Henry Hank. And me, and all the rest. Do you know what you pledge, boys? And do you know what you pledge, boys? You do love Pipkin, then? Yes. So be it, boys. Chew and eat, lads. Eat and chew. They popped the sweet lids of candy skulls in their mouths. They chewed, they ate. Swallow darkness, boys. Give up your year. They swallowed hard, so hard that their eyes shone bright and their ears banged and their hearts beat. They felt something like a cage of birds let out of their chests and bodies and flying off invisible. They saw but did not see the years they gave as gifts wing off round the world to settle somewhere in good payment for strange debts. They heard a yell, here, and then I, and then come. Bang, 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 the 3 words, then 3 sounds of shoes hitting stone. And along the hall and between the rows of mummies which leaned out to stop but did not stop, between the silent shrieks and screams, hell-bent, rushing, racing, flinging his feet, pumping his elbows, puffing his cheeks, shutting his eyes, snorting his nostrils, and bang, bang, banging the floor with his up and down feet came Pipkin. Oh, how he ran. Look at him come. Come on, Pip. Pip, you're halfway. Look at him race, said everyone with sugar candy in their mouths, with an honorable name of Pipkin locked in their sweet teeth, and his savor in their jaws, and with his fine name on their tongues. Pip, Pip, Pipkin. Don't stop now, Pip. Don't look back. Don't fall down. Here he comes, 3/4 of the way. Pip ran the gauntlet. He was good and fine and fast and true. Between 100 waiting mummies, he ran without touching it and did not look back. Won the race. Pip, you did it. You're safe. But Pip kept running, not only through the gauntlet of dead ones, but the gauntlet of warm, sweating, alive, yelling boys. He plowed aside them and raced upstairs, gone. Pip, it's all right. Come back. And they run up the stairs after. Where's he going, Mr. Moundshroud? Well, I should imagine, scared as he is, Moundshroud said. Home! Is Pipkin saved? Let's go see, boys. Up! He spun about like a whirlwind. His arms, flung out, cut the air like slicing grabs and swoops. So fast he spun that he made a vacuum, a self-made storm. And this cyclone, this huge upsuck of air, then seized the boys by ear, nose, elbow, and toe. Like so many leaves stripped from a tree, they yelled themselves into the sky. Moundshroud, raving, sank up, and they, if that is possible, sank and plummeted after. They hit the clouds like an explosion of gunshot. They followed Moundshroud like a flock of north-rushing birds heading home before their season. The earth seemed to give a turn from north to south. 1,000 small villages and towns spun under, alight with candles in tomb yards through all of Mexico, allied with candles flickering in pumpkins north of the border across Texas, and then Oklahoma and Kansas and Iowa, and at last Illinois, and at last home, cried Tom. Look, there's the courthouse. There's my house, and there's the Halloween tree. They swooped once around the courthouse and twice around the 1,000 pumpkin burning tree, and a final time around old Moundshroud's tall house with its many gables, many rooms, many gaping windows, high lightning rods, railings, attics, scrollworks, which leaned and groaned in their wind, their passage made. Dust sifted out of the windows to greet them. Shades flapped in yet another windows like ancient tongues lolling to be diagnosed by wind-born small doctors of strange medicines. Ghosts withered like white flowers, furling and unfurling in moldered flags which fell to ruin even as they shot by. And as the whole house circled was like all of Halloween ever. So cried Moundshroud, flapping his antique arms and webs and black silks as he landed on the roof and beckoned the boys to alight and pointed down through an immense sky window through all the levels of his mansion. The boys gathered around the skylight window and stared down a stairwell which opened out at various floors to various times and histories of men, and skeletons and dreadful musics played on flute bones. There it is, boys. Will you look? Do you see? There's our whole 10,000-year flight. There's our whole trip in one place, from caveman to Egyptian to Roman front porch to English harvest field to boneyard in Mexico. Moundshroud lifted the vast pane of glass. The stairway banister, boys. Write it down, each to his own time, his own age, his own level. Leap off where your costume fits, where you think you and your disguise, your mask belong. Get! The boys leaped. They sprang down the stairwell to the top landing. Then one by one, they popped onto the banister and slid, yelling down through all the floors, all the levels, all the ages of history kept within Moundshroud's incredible mansion. Roundabout down, they whisked, they skidded, they shuffled on the waxed rail. Raroom thud! JJ in his ape man costume landed in the basement. He glanced about it. He saw cave paintings and dim smokes and fires and shadows of hulking gorilla men. Saber-tooths burned their eyes at him from the cindered dark. Down around Rush went Ralph, the Egyptian mummified boy, bandaged for all ages, to land on the first floor where Egyptian hieroglyphs strutted in armies of symbol, with squadrons of ancient birds in skies and flocks of beast gods and scuttling golden beetles rolling dung balls down history. Crash! Hackles Nibley, with his scythe somehow still flashing in his hands, hit and almost rolled himself to mincemeat on the second floor where the shadow of Samhain, druid god of the dead, raised up his scythe upon a far chamber wall. Bang! George Smith, a Greek ghost, a Roman haunt, landed on the third floor near tar-painted porches with glued old wandering spirits to the sill. Thud! Henry Hank, the witch, plopped down in the fourth landing among witches leaping bonfires in the English, French, German, and countrysides. Fred Flyer, a lot of F's right here. Pardon me. Fred Fryer, the fifth floor took him in a heap, the beggar landing among sounds of beggars begging the country roads of Ireland, starving. Wally Wobb, the gargoyle himself, flew and crashed on the sixth floor where walls sprouted elbows and limbs and lumps, grimaces of fine gargoyle humors and glees, until finally, Skeleton Tom skidded off the banister on the topmost floor to tumble and knock white candy skulls like 10 pins in a dire game among the shadows of crouched women by mounds, with miniature skeleton brass bands playing mosquito tunes, while Mound Shroud, far above, still on the roof, yelled down, "Well, boys, do you see? It's all one. Yes? Yes," someone murmured. "Always the same, but different, eh? Every age, every time. Day was almost over. Night was always coming. And aren't you always afraid, Ape Man there? Or you, Mummy, that the sun will never rise again?" "Yes," more of them whispered. And they looked up through the levels of the great house and saw every age, every story, and all the men in history staring round about as the sun rose and set. Ape men trembled. Egyptians cried laments. Greeks and Romans paraded their dead. Summer fell dead. Winter put it in the grave. A billion voices wept. The wind of time shook the vast house. The windows rattled and broke the men's eyes into crystal tears. Then, with cries of delight, 10,000 times a million men welcomed back bright summer suns, which rose to burn each window with fire. "Do you see, lads? Think! People vanished forever. They died. Oh, Lord, they died, but came back in dreams. Those dreams were called ghosts, and frightened men in every age." "Ah!" cried a billion voices from attics and basements. Shadows climbed walls like old films rerun in ancient theaters. Puffs of smoke lingered at doors with sad eyes and gibbering mouths. "Night and day, summer and winter, boys, seed time and harvest, life and death. That's what Halloween is, boys, all rolled up in one, noon and midnight. Being born, boys, rolling over, playing dead like dogs, lads, and getting up again, barking, racing through thousands of years of death each day and each night. Halloween, boys, every night. Every single dark night and fearful, until at last you made it and hid in cities and towns and had some rest and could get your breath. And you began to live longer and have more time and space out the deaths and put away fear, and at last have only special days in each year when you thought of night and dawn and spring and autumn and being born and being dead. And it all adds up. 4,000 years ago, 100 years ago, this year, one place or another, but the celebration's all the same. The Feast of Samhain, the time of the dead ones, All Souls, All Saints, and the Day of the Dead, El Dia de Muerte, All Hallows, Halloween. The boys sent their frail voices up through the levels of time, from all the countries and all the ages, naming the holidays which were the same. Good, lads, good. Far off, the town clock struck 3/4 after 11. "Almost midnight, boys. Halloween's almost over." "But," cried Tom, "what about Pipkin? We followed him through history and parades, crying him in wakes. Is or isn't he alive?" "Yeah," said everyone. "Did we save him?" "Did you indeed?" Mound Shroud stared. They stared with him across the ravine to a building where lights were going out. "That's the hospital, boys, but check his house. The final knock of the night. The last grand trick-or-treat. Go ask for final answers. Mr. Marley, see them out." The front door flew wide. Bang! The Marley knocker on the door gaped its bandaged jaw and whistled them farewell as the boys slid down the banisters and raced for the door. They were stopped by a final shout from Mound Shroud. "Boys, well, which is it? Tonight with me or trick or treat?" The boys took a vast breath, held it, burst it out. "Gosh, Mr. Mound Shroud, both!" Rap went the Marley knocker. Slam went the door, and the boys were gone. running down through the ravine and up along the street, gasping hot gusts of air, their masks falling to be trampled until at last they stopped at Pipkin's sidewalk and looked at the far hospital and back at Pipkin's front door. "You go, Tom, you," said Ralph. And Tom slowly edged up to the house and put his foot on the front step, and then the second step up, and approached the door, afraid to knock, afraid to find the final answer about dear old Pipkin. Pipkin dead? Pipkin in a last funeral? Pipkin gone forever? No. He tapped the door. The boys waited on the sidewalk. The door opened. Tom went in. There was a long moment of the boys on the sidewalk, standing cold and letting the wind freeze their most awful thoughts. Well, they yelled silently in at the house. The shut door, the dark windows. Well. And then at the last, the door opened again. And Tom came out and stood on the porch, not knowing where he was. And then Tom looked up and saw his friends waiting for him a million miles off. Tom leaped off the porch, yelling, "Oh gosh, oh gosh, oh gosh, oh gosh." He ran along the sidewalk, shrieking, "He's okay. He's all right. He's okay. Pipkin's in the hospital. He took his appendix out at 9 tonight. Got it just in time. Doctor says he's great." Pipkin? Hospital? Great? The air jumped out as if each had been punched in the stomach. Then their air went in and out, again in a great rave, a yell, a ragged shout of triumph. "Oh, Pipkin! Pipkin! Oh, Pipkin!" And the boys stood on the Pipkin's lawn and the sidewalk in front of Pipkin's porch and house and looked with numb curiosity at each other as their smiles spread and their eyes watered and they yelled and the happy tears ran down their cheeks. "Oh boy, boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy," said Tom, exhausted and weeping with happiness. "You can say that again," said someone, and they all said it again. And they all stood there and had a fine, happy cry. And since the whole night was turning soupy with tears, Tom looked around and revved them up. "Look at Pipkin's house. Don't it look awful? Tell you what we do." And they ran and each came carrying back a lit pumpkin and lined them up on Pipkin's porch rail where they smiled outrageous smiles to wait for Pipkin to come home. And they stood on the lawn and looked at the lovely sight of all those smiles, their costumes tattered upon their arms and shoulders and legs, and the grease paint dripped and running on their faces, and a great wondrous happy tiredness gathering in their eyelids and arms and feet, but not wanting to go yet. And the town clock struck midnight, gung, and gung again to the full count of 12. And Halloween was over. And all about the town, doors were slamming and lights were going out. The boys began to drift, saying night, and again night, and some good night, but most night. Yes, night. And the lawn was empty, but Pipkin's porch was just full of illumination and warmth and baked pumpkin smell. And ghost and mummy and skeleton and witch and all the rest were back at their own homes, on their own porches, and each turned to look at the town and remember this special night they would never in all their lives ever forget. And they looked across the town at one another's porches, but especially on and over across the ravine to that great house where they, at the very top, Mr. Moundshroud stood on his spike-railinged roof. The boys waved, each from his own porch. The smoke curling out from high Moundshroud Gothic chimney fluttered, motioned, waved back, and still more doors were slamming to lock all around town. And with each slam, one more pumpkin, and then another, and another, and another on the huge Halloween tree snuffed out. By the dozens, by the hundreds, by the thousands, doors banged, pumpkins went blind, snuffed candles smoked delicious smokes. The witch hesitated, went in, shut the door. The mummy stepped into his house and shut the door. A pumpkin with the face of a mummy extinguished its light. And finally, the last boy in all the town remaining alone on his veranda, Tom Skelton in his skull and bones, hating to go in, wanting to wring the last dear drop from his favorite holiday in all the year, sent his thoughts on from night air toward the strange house beyond the ravine. "Mr. Moundshroud, who are you?" And Mr. Moundshroud, way up there on the roof, sent his thoughts back. "I think you know, boy. I think you know. Will we meet again, Mr. Moundshroud? Many years from now, yes, I'll come for you. And a last thought from Tom. Oh, Mr. Moundshroud, will we ever stop being afraid of nights and death? And the thought returned. When you reach the stars, boy, yes, and live there forever, all the fears will go, and death himself will die. Tom listened, heard, and waved quietly. Mr. Moundshroud, far off, lifted his hand. Click! Tom's front door went shut. His pumpkin, like a skull on a vast tree, sneezed and went dark. The wind stirred the great Halloween tree, which was now empty of all light, save one pumpkin at the very top. A pumpkin with Mr. Moundshroud's eyes and face. At the top of the house, Mr. Moundshroud leaned out, took a breath, and blew. His candle in his pumpkin head on the tree fluttered and died. Miraculously, smoke curled out of his own mouth, his nose, his ears, his eyes, as if his soul had been extinguished within his lungs at the very moment his sweet pumpkin gave up its incensed ghost. He sank down into his house. The roof trapdoor closed. The wind came by. It rocked all the dark, smoking pumpkins on the vast and beautiful Halloween tree. The wind seized 1,000 dark leaves and blew them away up over the sky and down over the earth toward the sun that must surely rise. Like the town, the tree turned off its embered smiles and slept. At 2 a.m, the wind came back for more leaves. The end. Thank you, everybody who joined me for this reading. I really like this story, and I'm really looking forward to the holiday season. I hope this was maybe one of the stories that you've never heard before, and that it will inspire you to go out and find some other Halloween stories. There's tons out there. And with that, I thank you again, and I bid you adieu and happy October. Thank you.